For my Miracle Truss building, I opted not to use the traditional metal siding. There were a few reasons. One, I really think it'll look awesome. Additionally, I think it'll be a little warmer and a little quieter than metal. And here in Alaska, coming across cedar isn't all that hard. For those of you that opt to go with the traditional metal siding, this video won't be much help. But if you decide to do cedar, here's how I went about it. First, I put a layer of tar paper on every purlin. Where 2 layers of tar paper overlapped, I would attach 1/2-inch plywood strips, which I'd rip to 1.5 inches, using roofing nails. I did this for a couple of reasons. Probably most important, this adds what they call a rain screen, or an air gap, between your building and your siding. Particularly here in southeast Alaska, having your siding be able to breathe is super important. It also holds my tar paper in place really well. And finally, it helps you see exactly where you need to nail your boards. The purlin structure of the Miracle Truss building is custom made for board and batten siding. We made sure our first board was nice and plumb. Once it was securely attached, we just used a small piece of 1/2-inch plywood to measure the appropriate gap for the next board. On top of the walls, we ran a string that was parallel to the roof to ensure that our siding and roof line matched. My building's 11 feet, and you can see that there's about a 1-foot gap at the top of my siding. In this gap, I'm actually going to place rigid greenhouse plastic so that I get ambient light into the structure without having to use electricity all the time. In a future video, I'll go into how I attached this greenhouse plastic. My boards extend from the top purlin to 2 inches below the treated sill. That way, any water won't enter into the building. We cut our boards at 10 foot 3 inches to accomplish this. We nailed our boards only on the left-hand side, using stainless steel 8-penny nails. Because my lumber's still green, this should allow the boards to shrink without causing any damage. Next, we cut the battens 3/4 of an inch shorter than the boards. I'll need to overlap my rigid greenhouse plastic over the boards just to keep everything watertight, and this 3/4 inch difference will allow my greenhouse plastic to overlap the boards nicely. We would check the plumbness of the boards about every 5 or 6 boards, and if necessary, we'd change the spacing a little bit to plumb up the boards. When it came time to place the battens in place, we used a little jig that we made. You'd place this jig on the edge of the board, and it would perfectly align the batten with the center gap between the 2 boards. Next, we'd ensure that the bottom of the bat was flush with the bottom of the boards. Then we would just nail the center of the bat with 16-penny ring shank stainless steel nails. This holds the unnailed portion of the board firmly against the building while allowing it to shrink or stretch as needed. The 16-penny nails suck the boards in nice and tight, but I may have to go through in a year or two and just reinforce some of the bats with 3.5-inch screws. Once the wall was all finished, we just cut the tar paper off just slightly above the level of the siding. We shouldn't have to worry about the wall draining properly, since there's a 1/2-inch gap every 8 inches. Once I get a perpendicular wall in place, then we'll just use some trim to cover the corners. We had hoped to side both the east and west walls. However, we ran out of both siding and time. It's going to have to wait for another trip.
Well-oiled machine.
Cedar siding takes a lot of boards, and my dad and friends had cutting the cedar boards down to a fine art.
There's one of 4 sides completed, pretty much. A couple of bats, but other than that.
I knew it would look good, but I didn't think it would look this amazing.